Hey, I'm Vanessa. I'm an alcoholic. I hope you're into awkward and honest overshares about sobriety and spiritual growth because it's kind of my thing or whatever. Hey everyone, my name is Vanessa. I'm an alcoholic. If this is your first time here, welcome to this channel. I talk about sobriety and spiritual growth. In this video, it is the second part of my domestic violence relationship videos in the last part of it, but I just want to address the second part in the rehabilitation process. In the last video, if you haven't seen it, I do recommend going to check that out. It does kind of talk about the patterns of domestic violence and abuse. Also, taking accountability for my part, which is continuing to engage in these types of relationships with these types of men, and kind of the ultimate, how my alcoholism factored into that, and where it landed me, which was in jail with a felony corporal injury, whatever charge against me. Okay, this was when I was already on probation in violation of that probation for my third DUI. So I was facing a significant amount of jail time and a felony on for a violent offense on my record. And this was because, again, physically assaulted by a significant other. And because I was intoxicated and when the police came and I was the incoherent one, I got arrested and violated my probation for my third DUI. So clearly there's some other issues here besides just this guy that I was dating. I was an alcoholic. I had very low self-esteem. I had no real sense of self-worth. I put myself in constantly dangerous situations. I allowed myself to be treated in ways that not even a dog deserved to be treated, to be quite honest. And then I also engaged in abusive behaviors. I also was participating in like jealousy that extended beyond just like a normal, healthy type of jealousy. It was like monitoring, checking people's phones, like monitoring that. It was just like, that was this type of relationship. It was always like high conflict, high stress. It was always a constant monitoring of like, is he gonna call? He's not gonna call. Is it, and also this like off and on hot, cold. And then like, just like, the verbal abuse that goes along with that. And the physical stuff that goes with that. There were a lot of things to untangle from this relationship. And I want to pick up in the story where I ended up in jail. So it's a quick timeline of this. I had gotten my third DUI in April of 2015. I had gotten probation granted to me in August of 2015. And then 2 weeks later, I was arrested for this domestic violence incident that happened while I was drunk and intoxicated. And basically, by the way, apologies, not really for my glasses. Like, eyes have been so dry, you guys. I've never really had allergies either, but they are kicking my ass this year, and I don't understand what that's all about. But anyway, arrested for corporal injury, and which is a really fancy and scary name for domestic violence, like assault, I guess. And that was a felony. And then because of that second arrest, and because I was already on probation for my third DUI, I was immediately remanded at my court date, which means I was taken into custody on August 27th of 2015. And then I wasn't released for a while after that. Since they removed my probation, I had to fulfill the 3 months in jail for my third DUI. And then I was fighting the domestic violence case because I was like, I am the victim here. I am the freaking victim. Why am I in jail for this domestic violence thing? I wasn't even arguing the DUI thing anymore, but it did not look good because now I had 2 cases back to back where I was under the influence. My BAC was a 0.2 in 2008. I got my first DUI, and that was a point. What was that? It was a 0.21. My second DUI was like a 0.22, and then my third DUI was like 0.23. So it was like with every DUI, my drinking got worse, and it was because my drinking got worse. So I went from like an occasional binge drinker to an everyday drinker to an all-day drinker. to really, I was just functioning just to drink. So that's how that escalated over the course of 10 years. And by the time that and the same thing, when I got arrested and took my BAC, because they knew I was on probation for a DUI, I had like a 0.23 again. So it was just a very high BAC, but I was still functioning at that time. Then, oh gosh, wait, I just had a flashback to another hospitalization, and I was like, I remember a nurse was like reviewing me for like discharge, like to like get released from the hospital. And she said that I didn't appear intoxicated until they took my blood work, and that was a 0.2 something. And she was like, and by that time I had already ripped out my IVs and like left the hospital, which my parents totally allowed me to. They had gone to visit me. They drove down to San Diego to visit me. Okay, anyway, this has nothing to do with DB thing. I was remanded, put in custody. And so then I was fighting this felony charge while I was in jail. And by the way, the court process when you're in jail is horrible. You are waking up basically like at 3:30 or 4 a.m. and they wake you up and they give you their crappy little, breakfast, which at that time in the morning you're kind of grateful for because you probably didn't eat until like 4 o'clock the night before, because that's dinner time. I don't really remember the time schedule anymore, but it was all pretty horrible. And you're cold. I just remember being cold all the time. And you get shipped on this bus to the court, and you're there with all these other women who are also going to court. And everyone in there is nervous. I remember one time this lady had a seizure on the bus, and then the bus had to like stop and turn around. And then we're like, we have court dates. So what are you going to do? And then they just ended up driving anyway. So it was just really sad. And it was really sad because when you're on the bus, you get to like look at people just living their normal ass lives. And I remember being so sad on the bus and being like, I can't wait until I am done with this. Like, I will give myself credit for that. I just always knew that the bad times would be done at some point, and I knew that I had to do something to make that happen. I just didn't know what at the time, and I wouldn't know for another 2 years after that. But I still always had hope that things could be different. And I'm grateful that I had that hope, because things ended up very different. Fighting that in jail was awful. So you go to court and then you're in cuffs, and you're sitting there and waiting for them to call your case still, because there's still the general public who's fighting their cases, and then there's the inmates who are fighting their cases. And then I had a public defender, and God bless her, she was really trying, you guys. She was really trying, but it was so intrusive in a lot of ways. I don't know how to explain this, but like, so she would show me these photos of the night of the fight, and this guy had like bruises all over him, and um like scratches on his back. And she was like, is this like a sex thing? Is this something that you guys usually engaged in? Was this like role playing? And I was like, this man beat me and like intimidated me, and you're asking me if this. No, it wasn't. And second of all, now I have like healthy fingernails, but back then I was biting my fingernails. I had zero fingernails. Okay, there was no way those scratches were mine. And I was like, no, but also they just didn't look like somebody who, like, I don't know, I honestly to this day think that he scratched himself. um because it just wasn't anything. It was so weird. But she showed me those photos, and I was like, that was not me. I was like, and he might have been with other women at that point, I don't know. I was like, that was not, these are photos taken on the night of the arrest when I was arrested. I was like, that was not me. And then the bruises also didn't make any sense. Even like trying to fight him off, it would have been like in the front of his body, um, or on his face, which was he wasn't. Um, but somehow he was bruised on the back. I don't know. It was really weird. Also his arms were bruised And I was like, was I gonna do that? I was like 5'2". This was a 6 foot giant dude who worked out and like everything. Like I was like, there was no way. I was scared. Unless like I said, the last thing I remembered was that he'd kind of like shoved me into the corner of a room and was like keeping my phone from me. Um, so all of that, it was just really just like insulting. And I knew that she believed me, but I also knew that I didn't really give her a lot to work with. Like there wasn't enough to prove my innocence. And I harbored a lot of resentment around that because she was like, you need to plead guilty. Like, and I was like, no. And then like I went through another public defender who was like, you need to plead guilty. I was like, no. And then my poor father was like, all right, because I was facing such a significant amount of jail time, was like, he like drained some of his savings to get me to pay for a private attorney. And that lady wasn't super helpful either. She was like, you need to plead guilty, and it was like, I have the calls. There is history here of me calling the cops on this guy because he has assaulted me. Like, why is none of his history being called into question here? I don't not a violent person like that. Like that is outrageous, right? Like, and again, I'm so upset about this sometimes still, not because of me, and I ended up pretty okay actually. By the way, part of what helped me find some peace in the situation is that when I got into recovery and I was still harboring this resentment, look at my hair. Oh my gosh. One of my mentors was like, can you really say with 100% certainty that you were innocent that night? And because I was a blackout drunk and I could not verify the 100% certainty that I was innocent, I learned to let it go. And in letting go, I regained so much peace. I am upset about this because this happens to women thousands of times a day, if not millions. I don't know how many women are incarcerated right now because they tried to defend themselves or because they were under the influence of something while someone else was attacking them. Like that is so infuriating to me. And this is why I'll always believe a woman. I don't care. I don't care if she's an alcoholic or whatever, because there are far more women who are telling the truth than are lying about it. And whatever, for that person who's lying about it, she still needs help in some way, right? Ugh, I don't know. I just have to say that I love the resilience and the strength of the beauty of women who can come back from situations like this. And it's taken me a long time to get there because I couldn't honor that within myself. I just, for a long time, was like, this down bitch, like, look at the situation you got yourself in now, Vanessa. Like, was it really worth it? Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, all I needed was just somebody to say, it can get better and you deserve more than this. So I'm fighting. That attorney is like, this is what I can do. She ended up saying, like, if I plead guilty, they'll wipe any of the jail time. And I was like, yeah, please, I don't want to serve any more time in jail, but for the love of God, just get me into treatment. Like, I am willing to commit myself to treatment. I need to be in treatment. Like, look at my arrests. They're all alcohol related. Come on, you guys, do your job and help me so that I'm not a menace to society. And so I just remember just begging that attorney to like, please tell the judge that I need help and I am willing to get it. And I was like, if you do this, I will change my life, you know? And she did it. And so I got to go to rehab for 3 months instead of jail. And they knocked down my charge to a misdemeanor. So it was actually a battery misdemeanor. Still sounds pretty rough. I was like, I'll take it. I don't want a felony. Oh, and I had to do court mandated domestic violence rehabilitation offender classes. I spent that time in jail. Then I went to rehab. Rehab was really interesting and very important for me in my healing because I got to be around a lot of other women who had suffered similar or other traumas related to relationships. And I got to see in these women over and over again through their honesty and their transparency and their vulnerability and their courage to talk about these things that we are just traditionally taught are so shameful. Um, that, I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only person to have been in this type of situation. If I could extend and feel this amount of love and compassion for these women, I could also extend that same love and compassion to myself. And I saw women really putting their whole lives together, encouraging. I was like, okay, these women are doing it. They're trying. I'm going to try too. And when I was released, I ended up going to a sober living. And then part of my conditions from release, part of my probation was, the um, offender program for my DUI and also for the domestic violence. And so what happened was I would go into this group once a week. Um, and it was another group just of all women. It was in Vista, California. It was at some community center. I want to say it was maybe like 10 of us, if that. And we would go and sit in this room with a licensed therapist, and she would lead the group. And every week for a year, I kind of wish I had those notes, honestly, because it was really interesting to learn and to unlearn so much that I had kind of like picked up about relationships, because it was so skewed. It was just things as simple as like boundaries of like, if someone says, if you're tickling your person and they ask you to stop and you continue to do it, you're violating a boundary. And that was like so mind blowing because I could think of like 100 times where I asked this guy to stop and he just kept doing whatever it was that he was doing that I had asked him not to. And it wasn't just like you're being annoying thing. It was like to my body, physical, like trespassing, it almost felt like, don't do that, don't touch me like that, don't do that to me, don't hurt me like that. And it was just consistently over and over and over. And I got to recognize and see where I had also done that to other people, and I was like, whoa, like that is so rude. It's so not okay. And so getting to actually just see that, even just and like the actual understanding of what domestic violence is, even just taking somebody's phone so that they can't call for help, that's a sign of violence. Locking someone in a room is a sign of violence. I mean, all these things that to anyone who maybe had like a healthier upbringing or healthier relationships was just kind of like, well, duh, why would you ever treat a human being like that? I had to unlearn all of these things. I didn't know how unhealthy, even just like the verbal of um, like threats that would happen. Like, if you do this, I will do this. Or the like less explicit threats of like you're gonna wish you didn't do that or like something like that. And it was just like, oh, these are not normal things. It was like somebody had taken that relationship, put it in a textbook and worksheets and was like, this is everything you should not do in a relationship. And it was just mind blowing. It was so important to me to be in that room with those women, with that therapist, and hearing their experiences as well, and just being like, oh, okay, well, at least I'm not the only person who's like learning this for the first time. And like, I don't know, there was something about that that really changed in me. And I was like, okay, that's absolutely like not the type of person who I want to be with anymore. Now I understand that as actually not love. And now I have like a better idea of like what I want in relationships moving forward, right? And I really appreciated that they went beyond just the physical abuse. Like they also went to financial abuse, like keeping someone from working or relying and depending on someone else's money, right? And making them feel guilty when they didn't want to. I had a history of dating people who didn't have any money, and I always worked. And sometimes I worked multiple jobs because I was out here in San Diego by myself and no one was going to pay my bills. And being shamed for having the money, being manipulated into giving them money. Um, into paying for things when I couldn't really afford it, you know, kind of being like coerced or being like pressured into paying for stuff that I didn't want to. And so it, that was one form. Another form is like, no, don't work. Like, I will give you an allowance if you get any money beyond that, like you're in trouble type of thing. Um, and that's all, these are all forms of like trying to control somebody, right? And then there's like the emotional abuse of it. And like back then, gaslighting was not actually that big of a term, but a lot of it was like trying to it was just gaslighting. It was like you're both experiencing a certain reality, and he would try to like talk me out of it and be like, that didn't happen. That absolutely never happened. Like, and I was like, what? No, it did. I was there, dude. Like, I have actual video evidence of it. And and then I would also do that to men. Not in that relationship so much, but like in previous relationships, I remember just being like, I never said that. Then, you know, it was just like being completely blackout drunk and being so ashamed by the time I came to, that when I would be held accountable for my actions, I'd be like, that didn't happen. You're remembering that wrong. It was just so gross. It was so gnarly. Um, so then there's that type of like also emotional abuse, and then the verbal stuff also, like, oh, who's gonna want you? You're so less than, you're not worthy, no one's gonna love you like I love you, blah blah blah, you know, all of those types of words. Something like I think about mostly in that, beyond just that, like the physical, and then I'm not going to get in too much into like the sexual abuse stuff that happens either, because that could be pretty triggering and I just don't want to talk about it right now. There is like this other that it was just to me like my mental, really my mental like instability that occurred, because he would be like, oh, I'm talking to so and so, and like on instantly I'd be like insecure or something, and then he would kind of like throw that in my face, and then also there would be this underlying just like, if you don't like behave, I'm gonna like cheat on you type of energy. And also it was like, you know, not calling me 5 times and then I'd call back and then he wouldn't answer, and I'm like, okay, or just like texting me a bunch of times and then not replying to my texts. Um, and so it was just really just showing up at my work, like that was not cool, or where I lived, also not cool. He just had all of these ways of just like being unwelcome, like I don't, I just felt like I was constantly on edge, always. It was like, what's the drama today? Not even just today, what's the drama this hour? It was just a constant like trespassing of my boundaries at all times. And like I said, I also like participated in some of this too. It's so exhausting. Like it makes my body physically exhausted just thinking about it. And so I was getting to unlearn all of this through this 52-week thing that I had to do. And when I completed it, I was a little bit sad because I was like, oh my gosh, now where am I going to go to like learn about all this? Well, and then my first few years of sobriety, I started to date, and I just really noticed I was not liking the men that I was attracting. And in retrospect, like when I think about some of those men now, they were just really nice guys. They were just really kind gentlemen, really like thoughtful. They were really straightforward and just kind of transparent. And there was something about that that my nervous system still couldn't accept. Like it was still rejecting that because it thought it was boring. And so I went through this phase where I got back into like the bad boys and like, men who are still struggling with addiction, and men who were really just like looking for a therapist, I guess, and not really caring, not asking me how my day went, not asking how I'm doing, not taking any real interest in me, just kind of using me as somebody to fulfill their need for attention, I guess. And so all of the care that I would give to other men was not being reciprocated in any like meaningful way. Then and this was all still very much a reflection of what I felt I deserved, right? Like I still was like, oh, I'm not really worthy of genuine attention or affection. And it was, I was still very much in that mindset. Even though I was sober at this point years. And then in 2020, I had so 17, 18, 19, 20. So like I was 3 years sober, 2.5, 3 years sober. And I had begun to date men I noticed who were just flat out liars. Just a flat out, totally dishonest. And it was crazy because I went on dates with like 3 men, and they all told me completely different stories and like who they were. But like to me, they didn't actually show any of these other red flags that I had come to know from like domestic violence, right? So I was like, okay, well, these are not, but that was still a form of like abuse because it was still really emotional manipulation. Because I would question them and I'd be like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like, and anybody who cannot just answer a question straightforward, who doesn't offer information willingly about things that they know or important. Like I dated this guy for like 6 months. And then towards the end of the 6 months, I found out that he had a son or a daughter. He had a whole child he never mentioned. And I was like, hey, so-and-so told me you have a child. Is this true? And he was like, oh yeah. He's like, you never asked, and I'm an open book. I'm like, do you know what an open, no, that's not. And then shortly after that, he just completely ghosted me because I was like willing to still, I mean, this just goes, I mean, that should have been red flag, right? That should have been like run the other direction ASAP. But also it was a pandemic and he was cute and I was bored. And then he ended up ghosting me anyway, because it was, I don't know. I mean, he just felt, I don't know. Other guy was like, just, I kind of talked about him. He has severe mental issues. He's narcissistic and complete. I think he really believes his own lies. I feel like that's even scarier. He made up this whole thing about being in bands and like being in movies and like these things were not true and they knew they weren't true. And then when I told him about it, he also ghosted me for like a year and then came back around in my life in like 2021, 2022. And then his lies really started to impact me because I saw how he was truly treating people. And I was like, oh, no, but he was a master gaslighter. Like he would tell me something. He would just do everything to like make me look crazy. I mean, I just blew up his phone with texts one time and I remembered I like flashed back to all the times that he'd show me his phone with like text messages from all these girls. And I'm like, why are you even keeping those, you crazy people, and showing them to me? Like that like that, I know I can almost guarantee that that girl wasn't crazy. You did something to her. Um, because then I also did the same thing. And but yuckies, we're done with that. There was another guy who was sober, but then he'd relapsed. Yeah, that was sad. And there just came a point where I was like, okay, I cannot continue to engage with you because you're actually not here to try to stay sober and build anything with me. He just wants to do heroin and then call me when he's sad about it. So I was like, no, I'm good. God bless you. But yeah, I'm just gonna stop dating. Because in that process as well, I ended up doing my 12 steps. And one of the steps is, steps 4, not one of the steps, the process of steps 4 through steps 7 and 8 and 9 was I really got to reflect on some of these resentments I had towards my exes and towards relationships with men and towards just like the institution of like marriage and relationships. And I realized I had a lot of baggage around that, believe it or not. And what I got to see is that like I couldn't see my own value and worthiness and deservingness of happiness and love and patience and tolerance and kindness. And like I didn't think that I deserved those things. And so I also didn't feel like the men I was in relationships deserved those things. And instead of seeing and treating these men as, the child of God that they are created in the image of God that they're created, I actually just ended up using them as like a means to an end to validate myself and to feel whole and to feel like I was checking this box that said that I had a partner at least, even though he was a completely mean person to me, wasn't treating me well, at least I had this. And I was like using that to like legitimize my own being, it's like one person wants me. One person wants to treat me like shit when it was happening. I got to really see that like, oh, I can actually separate myself from this identity of being in a relationship to just being Vanessa, and this other person and their behaviors, their actions, who they are is not actually a reflection of me at all. It's just that person. But that was really like eye-opening. And I was like, okay, I need to continue to grow in this way. And, you know, I don't feel like you need to have an understanding or a relationship with God to like grasp that. But for me, it was really helpful to understand that, because for me to truly believe that I was redeemable and that I was loved and worthy and, created in the image of God, I had to be able to extend that same grace to everybody else, even to my exes, even to the pathological liars, even to everybody. And I still do, like, I still feel like this immense amount of compassion for these men who were in their own ways still doing the best they could. They have their own traumas, they have their own stuff that they have to deal with. I'm not the person to fix it for them, and neither is my face or my body. Okay. So they need to go figure that out on their own and hopefully away from other women. Read a lot of books, and some of these books I want to talk to you about. So one is, and I saw it in the comments, one of you mentioned it. It was Codependent No More by Melody Beatty. That was a pretty good one. It really got to show me like how I was in codependent relationship with others on both sides. So being the person who was like the hero and being like, oh, I can provide for you. I can do this. I can do that. Don't worry. I'll bail you out. I'll get you sober. I'll get you the help. I'll give you the money. I'll feed you the food. And being that person, and also being like, I need your money. I need your food. I need your place to stay. I need your validation. And it's like this inability to suffer the consequences without trying to fix it. I was always either the fixer or ruining things and expecting someone to fix it and rescue me. And so it was really helpful to me to kind of see that and see where to this day, I can still engage in that. It's to a far significantly less uh, kind of, the spectrum is just not anywhere near where it used to be. But I'm totally aware that especially in times when I'm really tired or exhausted or frustrated, or I'm just not getting my way, that I will still have the tendency to fall into these old patterns, and engage with people who also engage in these patterns. So it's just something to always be aware of. But that book was extremely important to me. It's this book called Getting the Love You Want. I can't really tell you a ton about it. It's by Harville Hendrix, and I'm pretty sure his wife helps too. One of the biggest takeaways that I got from that one was that concept of Imago Dei and having communication and like how to communicate. And the core essence of that being that like still like being able to honor that part in ourselves, that inner child within ourselves that needs to communicate and be seen and validated, and being able to do that in an adult manner, right? In a healthy manner. So that was like like just eye-opening for me. It also talks a lot in that book about how we tend to mirror our relationships with the parents who we felt least bonded to. Um, in my case, in how we try to like replicate that relationship with other people or significant others, in an attempt to like reconcile or fix it. So for example, this idea of like, I think I've mentioned it in other videos, but like this idea of like never being seen by my father, but being smothered to death by him. Like I was just kind of always this, and to this day, by the way, I've just still this idea of a daughter to him instead of just actually Vanessa, and just like this concept to him as opposed to just like an actual flesh and blood human being that he should probably just see who for who she is. And so I feel like there was always just like, there was just kind of like a shallowness or an emptiness in that connection. And so a lot of my relationships were like that. Surprise, surprise. And in those relationships, I tried to make them deeper than they were because that was what I was trying to do with my father for so many years. I mean, just as recent as last year, I was trying to do that. And it's like, it's just not going to happen. Like we're just not going to have that relationship. And I just need to like kind of like let it go and find that depth within myself and in other types of relationships with friendships and mentors and people who I look up to. um that's all I can really do at this point. And so it was really interesting to see that and like actually see how I have been able to like, for better or worse, replicate that in my relationships. And I think that like kind of being aware of that is honestly the first step to stopping it from happening. And when I catch myself doing it now, I'm like, oh no, we're not doing that again. It's like this walnut based coffee and it tastes horrible, but we're gonna drink it. All right. Another book that I read that totally changed like my perception of how I function in relationships is one that maybe doesn't sound like a relationship book, but I promise you it is. It is called A Radical Awakening. It's by Dr. Shafali Sabari. Um, Life-changing. I had heard of her because I had been following her on Instagram. She posts a lot of stuff. I found like a lot of it to like resonate as being very true. And so then when this book came out in May, spring of 2022, I just remember I like binge read that thing. And then I actually did a lot of audiobooks during this time. And then I just listened to it again. And it was so good. It gave me so much freedom. It gave me so much freedom from all of these like concepts, these preconceived ideas that I had, like just growing up with like what I thought a woman was, what I thought a woman had to act like and be like, and how she should engage in relationships and you know, why she should engage in relationships, all of those things. It just completely like broke down so many of these things that didn't feel true to me, but that I played into. And the description here of the book is like it lays out a path for women to discover their inner truth and the powers to help others and the planet. And it's exactly it. Like as soon as we begin to liberate ourselves, we begin to liberate the people around us. And that book completely transformed so many parts of me, even though it feels like just like a self-help book and just like about my own ideas, it shifted just how I approached everything in life, to be quite honest, but relationships was like number one. And then I also during this time, by the way, was seeing I guess he was like a counselor, a spiritual counselor kind of gentleman. His name was Jose Gutierrez, with a lot of individuals and have this as a service. And I remember we talked about my dating experience and we talked about my relationship to my parents, and he just automatically was like busting through my own delusions. Because I'd be like, oh, my parents are wonderful, they're perfect. And he'd be like, are they really wonderful? Are they really perfect? And little by little, it wasn't in this way of like, I don't know, like he just cracked me open in this way where I got to be honest. And I couldn't bullshit him, basically. And thank God for that. I wish I could see him more. I wonder, I should probably reach out to him more because it wasn't just like relationship stuff, but we did talk about relationships. And it really did impact the way that I viewed men again. Um, and so there was that. And then the last book that I read, it wasn't the last book, sorry. I read this book a couple of times and I never finished it because it was kind of damaging, actually. It was called The One-Way Relationships, and it's by Alfred H. Ells. It was pretty popular in my recovery community to do this book. It was really eye-opening, and it made me really aware of how certain incidences in childhood imprints themselves into us, right? So like there were certain, like when was the first time you ever felt shame? You know, when was the first time you ever felt rejection? When was the first time you ever felt fear? And like imprinted. Now, anything that has to do with that thing, I'm going to be wary of. Like my nervous system is now primed to run at the first sign um of like control or smothering or gaslighting. But yet, because it feels so comfortable, because it's what I've been accustomed to since childhood, the first place where I go to seek validation, attention, affection. And it's like this really sad, paradoxical way to engage in relationships that are ultimately damaging and unfulfilling. And so I got to see how some of my early childhood like relationships and you know, I, traumas, little t, big T, it doesn't matter. Just these traumas imprinted themselves on my psyche, and I molded an entire personality around that, an entire coping mechanism around that, an entire behavioral or system set of behavioral systems around that, you know? And so when I got to see that, I was like, oh, oops. Um, and I got to have a lot of grace for myself. But something that I didn't get through a lot of that is like, because I didn't finish the book because it was too heavy, honestly. I did have to face a lot of traumas in it. And I would probably recommend doing that when you're in therapy. I was out of therapy at this point. Um, but this book, you know, it really helped me to reflect on some of those patterns, and how those old patterns manifest in current day relationships. But it ended up with me feeling like a loss of identity because I didn't know who I was without those mechanisms in place. And it's taken me a long time since then. And maybe if I would have just finished the workbook, it's out of print, by the way. I don't know if you can even find it anymore, but um, if I had ever finished that workbook, if I would have gotten through that a lot sooner, because I felt like everything that I knew was just a trauma response. Like I was like, I am just a set of trauma responses. And I didn't know how to engage in relationships for a while. And I really only talked to like four people, which are the same four people who I've talked to through my entire sobriety. And, you know, I've also heard some mixed reviews from other people who have engaged with that work. Um, I don't regret doing it, but it did kind of do something to me that, again, for better or worse, maybe could have been worked through in a different way. And I think the person who was taking me through the work was also not very well. So that didn't really, I actually ended my relationship with her uh this year just because I began to see some other red flags. And so yeah, those, and then finally the book that really ultimately had me like wrap this all up in a nice little bow and be like, boom, now I know what I'm doing. Now I know what I want. Now I know who I am. Now I know I'm never going back to that type of relationship again. Actually, this book called Untamed by Glennon Doyle. I highly recommend Glennon Doyle, by the way. She's a great writer, and she does kind of weave in some spirituality into her stuff. Ultimately, really gives women this permission slip that we don't really need, right? We have this permission slip just inherently as human beings to just really get back into ourselves, to really honor our truths, to really be untamed, to really cut ties with all of the societal standards and expectations, all of these things around us that are not real. and just really sinking into ourselves, and finding out what actually nourishes us, what actually feels good, what actually feels true and pure and honest and loving. Like, what is that? And how do we transcend all of this man-made BS around us, in order to bring that up and make that our personality, not all of the weird coping mechanisms and stories and narratives that we developed around these things to protect these things from the damages that we have already encountered throughout our childhood or later adult traumas, but from actual just that place that nothing really can touch, that is so holy within us, and how do we bring that into relationships? And I think that that is a beautiful place to be. And listen, I'm not a saint in relationships. I definitely have some work still to do, but just understanding that we're always like evolving, right? And growing. And every day, like, I'm not the same person today that I was yesterday. And every day hoping that I'm just a little bit better than the person I was yesterday. Um, so yeah. And of course, during this time, I went to therapy for a couple of years. I had a really amazing therapist. Actually, she was a psychiatrist. She was doing my medications and she helped me get off of all of my medications. And it was just amazing to work with her. She helped me a lot. Um, and just being in all women's AA groups was also really helpful. Um, Learning and reading more just about codependency and what it is and how it manifests and the behaviors that we engage in is very important. Um, I highly recommend for anybody who has found themselves in domestic violence or just abusive relationships to stop dating for a little bit. Stop dating for a little bit, stop getting in relationships, and really just stop and reflect on who you are, um, and what you deserve. And oh, that's what it was. Yes. The inner child work did a lot for me. That was some of the work that I did with Jose. Also, I've done there's some inner child meditations you can find on YouTube as well. Just always getting reconnected with that, like, essence has always been so helpful to me when I'm just feeling so lost. And especially where it comes in relationships, because it's like we are the people who should have protected our child selves, right? And now we get to be those people, and there's still an inner child in all of us, and that inner child still deserves protecting. So, yeah, I think that that's all I have. I hope that this was helpful. I hope that some of it resonated with you all. I really appreciate you all sharing your experiences, whether it's related to drinking, your spirituality, or relationships. It's just really helpful to see that, and it's encouraging to see so many people interested in making a better life for themselves. I think that's really cool. And I'm glad that I can be on this journey with you. All right. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do leave me a comment, like this video. It really helps me out a lot. Please also keep an eye out on my interview series that I have coming out, where I'm doing interviews with people who are strong in their sobriety and pursuing spiritual growth. I am constantly inspired by these people, and I just want to share these conversations with you. And I hope that you get something out of it too. So thank you again so much for watching this video. Bye.